Ever heard of a millionaire with estates, hotels, and companies, whose wardrobe is full of expensive Italian suits and agbada, but who walks barefoot? This is the peculiar tale of Chief Ebele. Despite his vast wealth, he would go around barefoot, no matter who he was meeting, be it at the airport, meetings with dignitaries, or even lavish ceremonies. Ebele would show up without shoes. People often whispered, "Why will a man so rich walk without shoes?" When asked, Chief Ebele always had the same story. He claimed to have a rare medical condition, and his doctor had prescribed walking barefoot to ease the symptoms. That was the story he gave to his friends and family. His wife, Nkem, once tried to surprise him with a pair of expensive Italian shoes for their anniversary, but the reaction she received was one of pure fury. "I told you never to buy me shoes again. Do you want to kill me?" he yelled, his eyes blazing with anger. Nkem was left baffled by his strange behavior. This sickness of his, the one that supposedly kept him from wearing shoes, hadn't existed back then when they were poor in the village. It all started after he became wealthy. Although he had shown her a doctor's diagnosis, Nkem couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. However, she let it go, preferring peace in the home. One fateful day, Nkem went shopping at a luxurious mall. Her heart filled with excitement as she glanced around at the beautiful displays. As she browsed through the aisles, her eyes landed on a pair of beautiful Italian shoes. They were perfect, the exact size of her husband, Ebele. Her fingers brushed over the sleek leather, and a wild thought sprang into her mind. For years, she had been intrigued by Ebele's no-shoe rule, frustrated by his insistence on walking barefoot everywhere, even after they became wealthy. What disease could possibly stop him from wearing shoes? Nkem decided she had to know the truth. She purchased the shoes and planned to test her husband's mysterious sickness herself. That evening, when Ebele returned home, Nkem greeted him lovingly as always. She handed him a glass of cold juice laced with sleeping pills. "You must be tired, my love. Have this," she said with a sweet smile. Ebele, unsuspecting, drank it all in one gulp, smiling back at her. Nkem watched him closely as he placed the glass down and soon drifted into a deep sleep on the couch. Tiptoeing quietly, Nkem grabbed the hidden pair of shoes and approached her sleeping husband. Her heart raced as she quietly and gently slipped them onto his feet. She stood back, admiring her work with a satisfied grin, but her satisfaction was short-lived. Nkem went into the kitchen to prepare a meal, but moments later, she heard a loud, agonizing scream from the living room. "Why have you done this?" Ebele's voice echoed through the house. "Nkem, you have finished me." Nkem rushed in, only to find her husband sitting on the floor, his eyes bulging in pain. "Fire! Fire!" he screamed, clutching at his legs. "My legs are burning. Nkem, you have finished me." Nkem froze, her mind racing in confusion. There was no fire. Her hands trembled as she tried to calm him. "Ebele, what is happening? What fire?" Desperate, Ebele cried out, "Call my driver. We need to go to the village now." His voice was a mix of agony and fear. Nkem, terrified and unsure of what to do, watched as the driver helped her husband into the car. As they sped off towards the village, Ebele's scream haunted her. Chief Ebele's story had started many years before, when he was a poor man in the village. Life was tough, but his family was happy. He had 2 sons, a beautiful daughter, and his wife, Nkem, whose bright smile and soft eyes could melt stone. Ebele always said that he had won a jackpot when he married her, as Nkem had chosen him despite his poverty. Ebele was a hard-working man, taking on many jobs like clearing people's compounds, washing cars, cleaning houses, and even working at construction sites to provide for his family. Nkem supported him with her petty trading. Though they lacked financial stability, the love and unity in their home were unshakable. They made decisions together and ate their meals together, often laughing and sharing stories late into the night. But life in the village was not easy, and Ebele constantly faced the humiliation of his wealthier friends who had gone to the city and prospered. One fateful December, his old secondary school friends came home for the village annual celebration. Flaunting their wealth, Ebele decided to join the festivity, hoping to catch up with them. As they sat, eating and drinking, Uzo, one of his friends, who was already drunk, began mocking Ebele. Look at you. Secondary school dropouts, still poor and dirty, he slurred, while the others burst into laughter. Ebele, feeling embarrassed, tried to maintain his composure, but when Chima, another of his friends, added, "You are lucky you married a woman like Nkem. Her beauty is just wasting away with you." More laughter followed, cutting through Ebele's pride like a knife. Trying to leave the situation, Ebele stood up to go, but the men laughed again and told him to clear their plates. Chima added, "If you don't want to clear the plates, then pay for all the food and drinks you've had." Ebele, humiliated beyond word, couldn't afford to pay. So, with sadness in his heart, he cleared the plates like a common houseboy and left. When he returned home that night, he told Nkem everything. She held him gently, her soft eyes filled with love and comfort. "Ignore them, my husband," she whispered. "Those are not real friends. Avoid them." But deep inside, the wound had been cut and it festered. Days after the humiliation with his friend, Ebele was working at a construction site, hoping to earn enough money to feed his family. At the end of the day, the rich landlord who had promised to pay made an excuse about exceeding his transfer limit and asked Ebele to come back the next day. When he returned the next day, the landlord only gave him part of the money, telling him to come back in a week for the rest. Things got worse when his first son, Emeka, was hit by a car while coming back from school. His younger son, Ebuka, ran to him at the construction site. Without hesitation, Ebele abandoned his work and rushed to the hospital, where he met Nkem crying uncontrollably. Holding her close, he reassured her her son would be fine. The doctor, however, had grim news. Emeka was in a critical condition and treatment couldn't begin until a deposit was made. Ebele's heart sank, but he held strong for his wife and family. He left the hospital and wandered aimlessly through the streets, consumed by the thought of where he could find money for his son's treatment. He decided to ask the landlord for an advance on his pay, but the man claimed he had just spent all his money on materials for the construction. In desperation, Ebele thought of his wealthy friends. Despite their cruelty at the village festival, he had no choice but to swallow his pride. When Ebele reached Chima's house, the gateman asked him to wait. An hour later, Chima pulled up in his car. Ebele, his voice filled with desperation, explained that his son was in critical condition and he needed money to pay for treatment. Chima smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. "You can't just expect me to give you my hard-earned money for free. You have to work for it." Ebele agreed to do any work Chima asked, as long as it saved his son's life. Chima, lounging on his couch with a glass of juice in hand, asked Ebele to sweep the house and wash his cars. With no other choice, Ebele complied. He swept the entire house, scrubbed the floor, and washed the cars. When he finished, Chima handed him a small amount of money, peanuts compared to what he needed. "You can go to our other friend's house," Chima sneered. "Maybe by the end of the day, you would have the full amount. Nothing comes freely, my friend." Ebele's frustration boiled inside, but he had no choice but to leave Chima's hands, empty-handed and broken. As he walked down the street, consumed by thoughts of how to save his son, he stepped into the road without realizing it. A black SUV swerved to avoid hitting him, and the driver shouted, "Go and die at home if you want to die." Before Ebele could react, a man wearing a luxurious agbada stepped out of the SUV, his voice full of concern, asking, "Young man, are you okay?" Ebele, too overwhelmed to speak, simply nodded. The man insisted on knowing what was wrong, and Ebele broke down, telling him everything about his son's accident and how his friend had humiliated and used him. The man, listening with sympathy, offered to help Ebele pay the hospital bills. Ebele, ashamed, tried to refuse, but the man insisted. "Think of it as a loan. Pay me back when you can," he said with a kind smile. Together, they went to the hospital where the man paid the deposit, saving Ebele's son. He even gave Nkem some money to buy food for the family and handed Ebele a business card. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out," the man said before leaving. Ebele was grateful, but even with his son's recovery, his family financial woes continued. The next day, he lost his spot at the construction site to another worker. With no option left, he called the rich man, hoping to get a job. Ebele couldn't believe his fortune when the rich man told him to come to his house the next day. After days of sleepless nights, he had finally caught a break, or so he thought. The next morning, Ebele left his house early, barely able to contain his excitement. When he arrived at the luxurious mansion, the gateman, wearing a neatly pressed uniform, asked him to wait as the oga had stepped out briefly. Ebele sat in the waiting area, feeling small and out of place. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and everything around screamed money. Soon, a black SUV pulled into the compound. The rich man stepped out, his agbada fluttering in the wind. Ebele rushed to greet him, nearly prostrating on the ground. No need for all that, my friend," the rich man laughed, patting Ebele on the back. He led him inside to the massive living room, where expensive art hung on the walls and furniture was something straight out of the magazine. The rich man offered Ebele a drink and leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know a way you can become rich. Quickly, I might add. You have had a rough life, but I can help you turn that around. No blood will be shed, I promise." Ebele's eyes widened. He had heard of stories of rich men getting their wealth through shady means, but this man looked responsible. Yet, the idea of getting rich overnight felt too good to be true. He tried to focus on the man's word, but doubt clouded his thoughts. "What do I have to do?" Ebele asked cautiously. The rich man smiled. "There is an old man deep in the forest. He can help you, just as he helped me. Go to him and your fortune will change forever." The thought of wealth tempted Ebele. All the humiliation he had suffered, the poverty he had endured, it could all be over in a blink. But something didn't sit right. He told the man he needed time to think and promised to give his answer in 3 days. Ebele couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking of the rich man's offer and the old man in the forest. Nkem noticed his restlessness. "Obim," she said gently, placing a hand on his chest, "what is troubling you?" Ebele sighed and told her everything about the rich man and the old man in the forest, and the promise of wealth. Nkem frowned, worry lining her face. "It doesn't feel right," she whispered. "Nothing comes for free, especially not wealth. What if the man is leading you into trouble?" Ebele understood her concern, but his heart was heavy with the shame of their poverty. They had been starving for days, and their children barely had anything to eat. Just that night, their last pot of food had been too little to satisfy the children, and Ebele and Nkem had gone to bed with empty stomachs again. The next morning, Ebele made up his mind. "I will find that old man in the forest," he said to Nkem. Despite her protests, Ebele couldn't shake the images of his children's hungry faces from his mind. He set out, following the rich man's directions. The dense forest loomed ahead, and as Ebele ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in around him. The air grew thick, and strange sounds echoed through the underbush. After what felt like hours of walking, he finally arrived at the old man's hut. The door creaked open before he could knock, revealing an old man with long matted hair and sharp knowing eyes. "Ah, Ebele," the rich man said with a crooked smile. "I've been expecting you." Ebele's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. The man led him inside and instructed him to lay inside a casket that sat in the center of the room. Though fear gripped Ebele's heart, the thought of wealth pushed him to comply. As he lay there, the old man chanted strange incantations, and Ebele felt a heavy weight pressing down on him. The old man handed him a dark liquid, which Ebele drank with trembling hands. "Now you are now wealthy," the old man declared, giving Ebele a handful of gold coins. "But there is a price." Ebele froze. "What price?" The old man's grin widened. "Nothing involving bloodshed, but you must never wear shoes again for the rest of your life. Your feet must remain bare. The day a shoe touches your foot is the day you die, and your wealth will vanish." Ebele felt the weight of the word crash down on him. Shoes? Was that all? He had expected something much worse. But if that was the price to pay for wealth, then so be it, Ebele thought. He left the forest barefoot, gold jiggling in his pockets, determined to change his family's life. When Ebele returned to his village, the people whispered and stared. They had never seen him walk without shoes before, and now he walked barefoot with a broad smile on his face. Some thought he had gone mad, while others thought maybe he had struck it rich somehow. Nkem ran out to meet him, worry etched on her face. "Oh Bim, where have you been? I was so worried." Ebele smiled and handed her the gold coins. "I went to the rich man in the forest. We are now wealthy," he said, ignoring the puzzled look on her face. Nkem noticed his bare feet and asked, "Where are your shoes?" "I lost them in the forest," Ebele lied. "But don't worry, we are now rich. I can buy 1,000 pair of shoes." Despite her reservations, Nkem couldn't argue with the gold coin in her hand. Soon after, their life changed. Ebele's wealth grew rapidly. He built houses, bought luxurious cars, and moved his family to a mansion in the city. He owned hotels and companies, and his name became known far and wide. Ebele and his driver arrived at the edge of the dark forest. His swollen legs were burning like hot coals, his cries growing weaker with each step. The driver, seeing the state of his boss, quickly borrowed a wheelbarrow from a nearby villager and wheeled Ebele deep into the forest towards the old man's hut. When they finally arrived, the old man was waiting. He shook his head at the sight of Ebele, now crippled with pain. "You knew the rules, yet you let this happen," the old man said in a calm, detached voice. Ebele fell to the ground, begging, "Please help me. I will do anything." The old man remained indifferent. "Your legs will continue to swell and rot. Worms will consume your flesh. The agony you feel now is nothing compared to what awaits you." Ebele's heart raced as the old man offered a way out. "There is only one solution," the old man said, "but it requires a blood sacrifice. Your daughter." Ebele recoiled in horror. "My daughter? No, no, please. There has to be another way." The old man's gaze was cold. "A life for a life. If you want to live, she must be sacrificed." Ebele's words spun. His daughter, his precious girl whom he loved more than anything in the world. How could he sacrifice her? But the pain in his leg was unbearable. His wealth, his power, everything could be lost if he didn't act quickly. The thought of returning to poverty, of suffering more humiliation, tormented him. After hours of internal struggle, Ebele made a decision he never thought was possible. He called his daughter at her university. "My child," he said, forcing calm into his voice, "I need you to come to the village immediately. There is a special surprise for you. But don't tell your mother and your brothers. It's between you and me." Ebele's daughter, trusting her father, completely set out without hesitation. When Ebele's daughter arrived at the village, the driver picked her up from the motor park. He offered her a bottle of water, which she gratefully accepted, unaware that it was laced with sleeping pills. Soon, she drifted into a deep sleep. The driver carried her limp body into the old man's hut, laying her on the cold floor as Ebele watched in silence, his heart heavy but his mind determined. "Begin the incantation," the old man instructed. Ebele followed every instruction, muttering the dark words over his unconscious daughter. He placed her inside a casket and began chanting, preparing to pound her body in a large mortar as the old man has instructed. Suddenly, his daughter stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and she stared in horror at her father, standing above her with a pestle in hand. "Daddy, no!" she screamed, terror filling her voice. "Please don't do this." Her cries pierced through the quiet of the forest. A hunter nearby heard her desperate wails and raced towards the hut. The hunter burst through the door, his eyes wide with shock at the scene unfolding before him. "Stop there, Mr. Man," he shouted, brandishing his rifle. "What do you think you are doing?" Ebele, caught off guard, stumbled over his word. I was just trying to help her. She needs to." "Help her?" the hunter interrupted, incredulous. "You are about to brand her alive. Let her go now." The young girl, trembling and tears streaming down her cheeks, pleaded with her father. "Daddy, please, I don't want to be sacrificed. I trust you." Her voice shook with fear and confusion. The hunter stepped back, aiming his rifle directly at Ebele. "Untie her this instant. You will not harm her, or I would shoot you." Ebele, desperation clawing at his inside, glanced between the hunter and his daughter. He could see the fear etched on her face and felt the weight of his impending doom. He had come so close to sacrificing everything, and now everything hung in the balance. Reluctantly, Ebele untied his daughter, who scrambled away from him and pressed against the wall, breathing heavily. The hunter approached cautiously, keeping his rifle aimed at Ebele. "What were you thinking?" the hunter demanded. "Why would you do something like this?" Ebele dropped to his knees, sobbing. "I was desperate. I thought I could save myself. I didn't want to lose everything that I had gained, and I thought sacrificing her was the only way." The hunter shook his head in disbelief. "You are a fool. You have been bewitched by greed, and it almost cost you your daughter's life." At that moment, the other hunters arrived, drawn by the commotion. They surged into the hut, eyes wide with anger and shock as they processed the scene. Ebele, once a poor man, now a father, on the brink of sacrificing his own flesh and blood. "Take him," one of the hunters shouted, grabbing Ebele by the arms. "We need to bring him before the king. Let the truth be known." The village was alive with whispers and gasps as Ebele was dragged to the king's palace. The tension in the air was thick, and a crowd gathered to witness the man who had been so successful, now exposed for the monster he had become. The king, an imposing figure, sat on his throne surveying the room. His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief as he listened to the hunters recount the tale of Ebele's near sacrifice. "Ebele," the king said, his voice booming through the hall, "you were once a man of the village, and now you stand before me a coward. How could you even think of something this horrendous against your own flesh?" Ebele trembled, his body racked with shame. "Your Majesty, I was blinded by greed. The old man, he promised wealth, power. I thought I could control it, but it took over my life. I was willing to sacrifice my daughter for my own selfishness." Nkem was brought in at the moment, her heart racing as she caught sight of Ebele sitting on the ground in disgrace. Tears filled her eyes as she rushed to her daughter, who had been waiting anxiously by her side. "Ebele," Nkem cried, her voice breaking, "why would you do this? Why would you even think of hurting our daughter?" Ebele hung his head in shame, unable to meet her gaze. "I was wrong, Nkem. I thought I could save myself, but I realized now what I was about to lose." As the crowd murmured, the king ordered the guards to search for the old man, who had tempted Ebele with dark promises. "Find him," the king commanded. "He will pay for his deceit and manipulation." But when the guards ventured into the forest, they found the old man's hut had been engulfed in flames. Only ashes remained. The old man had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the remains of his dark magic. Back in the palace, the atmosphere was tense. The king looked at Ebele, his expression hardening. "You will be punished for your crime against your family and your village. You will spend your days in prison, where you will reflect on the man you have become." Ebele fell on his knees weeping. "Please, I beg you, I will change. I will do anything to make it right." But the king's decree were final. Ebele was taken away, his cries echoing through the palace halls. And he was led out. He cast a last longing look at his daughter, and in came his wife, his heart heavy with regret.